In a quiet diner, a billionaire single dad sat with his silent son, until a waitress knelt down, spoke gently, and the boy whispered his first word in years. The father's heart stopped. Who was this woman, and why did his child break his silence, only for her? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The snow along the city streets was still melting when Daniel Hawthorne pulled his sleek black car into the parking lot of a quiet corner diner. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the winter dusk, its glow painting the sidewalk in soft red and blue. For anyone else, it was just another place to eat, a small-town diner with creaking booths and the faint aroma of fried food. For Daniel, it was a sanctuary of anonymity. Here, there were no cameras, no shareholders, no gossip-hungry board members, just him and his son. Oliver clutched his small toy car as he slid out of the back seat. 6 years old, wide-eyed, and fragile, the boy had not spoken a word in nearly a year. His silence wasn't natural, it was born from grief. His mother's death had taken not only her presence, but also Oliver's voice. Daniel had tried therapy, private tutors, specialists who charged small fortunes. Nothing broke the wall his son had built around himself. Now, Daniel settled for routine. A meal out, a silent child by his side, a life of wealth that felt hollow. Inside, the diner was warm, almost painfully so compared to the chilled air outside. The bell over the door jingled as they entered, drawing a few glances. Daniel, tall and impeccably dressed even in casual wear, was impossible to ignore. But what caught more attention was the child by his side, dark curls falling into his eyes, tiny fingers. "Booth?" a waitress asked, menus tucked under her arm. Daniel gave a short nod, guiding Oliver into a booth near the back. The child climbed up without looking at anyone, pushing the toy car back and forth across the table in small, repetitive movements. Daniel exhaled, loosening his tie, his expression unreadable. He had learned to guard himself well. Moments later, another waitress approached. She wasn't the one who had seated them. She was younger, her dark hair pulled into a loose braid, her uniform slightly wrinkled from a long shift. Her name tag read Lily. What struck Daniel first wasn't her appearance, it was her eyes, gentle, focused, attentive. She didn't look at him, the billionaire who owned half the skyline. She looked at Oliver. "Hey there," Lily said softly, her voice a calm melody. Instead of towering over the child, she crouched beside the booth, lowering herself until she was eye level with him. "Can I take your order?" Oliver's toy car stilled mid-motion. He didn't meet her gaze, but something in his small body shifted. Lily didn't flinch. She rested the order pad on her knee and slowly signed with her hands. Basic, simple gestures that Daniel recognized vaguely from Oliver's therapy sessions. "What do you want?" Oliver's fingers tightened around the toy car. For months, he had ignored teachers, therapists, even Daniel himself. But now, he looked up, his lips. A sound escaped. Not a word, not quite, but a sound, fragile, trembling, alive. Daniel's head jerked toward him, disbelief flaring in his chest. His son spoke? No, not fully, but something. The wall cracked, his heart raced, and for the first time in months, hope pierced through the heavy fog of grief. Lily didn't gasp, didn't make a spectacle of it. She simply smiled, nodding as if Oliver had said something perfectly clear. "Got it," she said softly. "One pancake with extra syrup." Daniel blinked. He hadn't realized Oliver loved pancakes. When she left, Daniel sat frozen, his hand tightening around the edge of the booth. He glanced at Oliver, who had already returned to rolling his toy car along the tabletop, quiet once more. The moment might have been small, but to Daniel it was monumental. He cleared his throat, his voice rough. "Oliver?" The boy didn't respond. Daniel sank back against the booth, his chest tight. He couldn't explain what had just happened, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something about that waitress had reached his son in a way no one else had. When Lily returned with the order, Daniel watched her with careful eyes. She moved with an ease he rarely saw in people around him. No attempt to impress, no fear of who he was. She slid the plate of pancakes in front of Oliver, not Daniel, and added a small cup of syrup with a wink. "Get the hell out." Oliver looked at the plate. His small hand hovered, then lowered the toy car to reach for the fork. It was such an ordinary gesture, but Daniel felt something stir deep inside him. Oliver usually needed coaxing to eat in public. Tonight, he took a bite without hesitation. "You guessed right," Daniel said finally, his voice low, breaking the silence. Lily glanced at him, confused. "Sorry?" "Just cakes. I didn't tell you what he wanted." She shrugged, adjusting the tray against her hip. "I didn't need to. Sometimes you just know." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had spent endless sums trying to unlock his son's silence, and yet this stranger had done it with a guess and a smile. His pride bristled, but beneath it, awe bloomed. As she walked away, Daniel leaned forward, studying Oliver. "Do you like her?" he asked softly. For a fleeting moment, Oliver's lips curved, the smallest smile gone as quickly as it appeared. Daniel froze. That was the first smile he had seen in almost a year. The rest of the meal passed in silence, but it was different this time. Not the suffocating silence of loss, but something gentler, threaded with the possibility of change. When Lily returned with the check, Daniel found himself speaking before he could stop. "What's your name?" She raised a brow, tapping her name tag. "Lily. Why?" Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure how to explain what had just happened, how monumental it was that his son had uttered a sound, that he had smiled, that pancakes had been eaten without coaxing. "No reason," he muttered, though his gaze lingered longer than intended. Lily gave a polite nod and moved on to another table, leaving Daniel staring after her. He barely noticed Oliver's toy car clattering against the plate, or the cold air seeping in from the door as new customers arrived. All he could think about was the way his son had looked at her. By the time they left the diner, Daniel was unsettled. He buckled Oliver into the car seat, his mind racing. Wealth had given him power, influence, and control over nearly every aspect of his life, but it had not given his son a voice. Tonight, for the first time, he had heard it. And it had been because of her. As the car pulled out of the lot, Daniel cast one last glance at the diner's glowing neon sign. He told himself it was nothing, that tomorrow Oliver would return to silence, that tonight had been a coincidence, but deep down, he knew better. Something had shifted. Something had begun. 2 days later, Daniel found himself parked outside the same corner diner. He told himself it was a coincidence, a matter of convenience, that he didn't have the time to cross the city to one of the polished establishments he normally favored. But the truth pressed at him with a quiet persistence he couldn't shake. Iva sat in the back seat, toy car clutched tight in his hand, eyes distant. He hadn't spoken again since that night, but Daniel had seen it, the flicker of connection, the sound of a word half-formed. He couldn't let it go. "Hungry?" Daniel asked, voice softer than usual. Oliver gave the barest nod. That was all Daniel needed. He unbuckled his son, led him into the diner, and once again the familiar bell chimed above their heads. Inside, it was quieter than before. Only a handful of customers lingered over coffee, and there she was, Lily, moving between tables with her easy grace, a notepad balanced in her hand. Daniel's chest tightened, unexpectedly. When she saw them, her brows rose, surprise flickering across her face. But she didn't comment. Instead, she crouched once more at Oliver's side, as though nothing were unusual. "Back again, champ," she said warmly. Oliver's toy car slowed its endless path along the table. He glanced at her, then at his pancakes from last time, that another waitress had just delivered. Daniel held his breath, waiting. This time, the boy whispered one syllable, soft and broken. Daniel's world stilled, his throat closed as if the sound alone had reached inside and torn something loose. His son had spoken. Really spoken. A simple greeting, but it was enough to send Daniel's heart crashing against his ribs. Lily's smile widened, but she didn't gush or draw attention. She simply nodded. "Hi, Oliver. Nice to see you," she turned her focus back to her work, as though this was an ordinary moment. For Oliver, maybe it was. For Daniel, it was everything. When she came back with coffee for him, Daniel couldn't stop himself. "How did you do that?" She blinked. "Do what?" Spoke. "He hasn't," Daniel's voice faltered. "He hasn't spoken since his mother died." The words dropped like stones. He rarely admitted that truth aloud. Lily's expression softened, and she glanced at Oliver, who was absorbed in cutting his pancakes into careful squares. "I didn't do anything. I just talked to him like he had something to say back. That's all." Daniel studied her, unsettled. "Most people don't." "I know." She hesitated, then added quietly, "My little brother was born deaf. People treated him like he was broken, like he wasn't worth the effort. I hated it. So I learned sign language. I learned patience. Sometimes the world forgets kids aren't just problems to fix. They're people." Her words hit Daniel harder than he expected. He cleared his throat, turning his gaze to Oliver, but the thought had already taken root in his mind. By the time they finished the meal, Daniel had made up his mind. As she dropped off the check, he spoke with the sharp decisiveness that had once closed billion-dollar deals. "Work for me." Lily blinked. Said, "Oliver, he responds to you. He needs you." Daniel forced his voice to steady. "I'll hire you, as his caretaker. Whatever you're making here, I'll double it, triple it." Her mouth fell open. She looked at him as though he'd spoken a foreign language. "I'm a waitress, Mr. Hawthorne. I don't have training, I don't..." "You? They weren't used to it. You reached him when no one else could. That's all the qualification I care about." For the first time since he had entered, Lily's composure faltered. She shook her head, backing up slightly. "That's not fair to him. He deserves someone professional, someone who knows what they're doing, not me." Daniel leaned forward, his jaw set. "He spoke to you." Her breath caught. For a moment she looked torn, but then she gathered herself and placed the check on the table firmly. "I can't. I belong here. This is my life." Daniel watched her walk away, frustration burning under his skin, but beneath it all he knew he wouldn't give up so easily. For Oliver, he couldn't. 3 days later, she was standing in his mansion. It had taken persistence. He had returned to the diner, had offered again, not with the urgency of a businessman used to being obeyed, but with the urgency of a father. Lily had resisted, her pride flaring, but the sight of Oliver reaching for her hand one morning as they left the diner had undone her resolve. Now, she stood in the marble foyer of the Hawthorne estate, a duffel bag at her side, eyes wide as she took in the chandeliers and sweeping staircase. "This is temporary," she muttered, almost to herself. "Just until you find someone else." Daniel didn't correct her. He simply gestured for the staff to carry her bag upstairs. But he noticed the way his housekeepers exchanged looks, their lips tight. They saw her plain clothes, her worn shoes, her uncertainty. To them, she didn't belong. Neither did Oliver seem to notice. He actually ran, into the kitchen, tugging her after him with surprising determination. Daniel stood back, astonished. His son had barely interacted with anyone in months. Now, he was dragging Lily along like she had always been part of his world. The staff murmured. Daniel silenced them with a look. That evening, he watched from the doorway as Lily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, arranging blocks with Oliver. She didn't hover or push. She waited, patient, while he built small towers, his toy car never far from reach. "To help me?" she asked softly. To Daniel's shock, Oliver whispered again, "Yes." The sound was shaky, tentative, but unmistakable. Daniel gripped the doorframe, his throat thick. 2 words in a week, progress no doctor, no specialist, no therapy had ever achieved. Later, when Lily tucked Oliver in for the night, Daniel finally spoke. "You think you're not qualified, but you're the first person to give him back his voice." She shook her head, adjusting the blanket around Oliver. "He gave it back to himself. All I did was listen." Daniel stood there, silent, watching his son's small chest rise and fall as he drifted into sleep. For the first time in a long time, hope stirred in his heart. He didn't know where this fragile bond would lead, But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't let her walk away. The contrast was stark. Lily woke each morning in the guest wing of Daniel Hawthorne's mansion, and still half expected to find herself back in her small apartment, where the sound of buses rattling past her window was the alarm clock. Here, sunlight spilled through arched windows across marble floors, and silence lingered in every corner like a weight. She tried not to be intimidated by it. She reminded herself that she wasn't here to belong, she was here for Oliver. But Oliver was changing. Each day, she brought something simple into his world. A set of watercolor paints she bought with her own money, hidden in her bag. A stack of storybooks from the library, pages worn with use. A basket of flour and sugar to make cookies together. Where the house was sterile, she carved spaces of warmth, and Oliver clung to them eagerly. One afternoon, while Daniel paced in his office, negotiating with investors, Lily sat cross-legged on the patio with Oliver, a canvas spread between them. He dabbed cautious strokes of blue across the white, his tongue peeking out in concentration. "Good," Lily encouraged softly. "That's the sky. Want to add clouds?" Oliver looked at her, hesitant, then dipped his brush into white paint. A small whisper followed, quiet as a breath. The word was imperfect, fractured, but it was a word. Lily's chest tightened. She didn't praise too loudly, she just smiled, brushing her own stroke beside his. "Yes, clouds." When Daniel stepped outside 20 minutes later, still tugging at his cufflinks, he froze. His son sat with paint smudged across his cheeks, lips moving, whispering words he hadn't spoken in years. Daniel stood there too long, unable to enter, because the sight stole every practiced breath from his lungs. That evening, at dinner, Lily guided Oliver into telling a story with his blocks became castles, cars became dragons, teddy bears knights. Daniel sat at the head of the table, knife and fork poised but unmoving, watching in disbelief as laughter spilled from his son in short, breathless bursts. Doctors had failed, therapists had failed, his money had failed, and yet here was this woman, a waitress with no credentials, drawing miracles out of silence. He fought it down, the rush of admiration threatening to pull him under. It was chance, he told himself. Coincidence? Temporary? But he couldn't ignore the truth. Oliver was alive again, in ways Daniel hadn't seen since his wife died. The test of this new reality came at a formal dinner. Daniel rarely brought Oliver to such events, polished evenings where crystal clinked and every smile was edged with ambition. But this night, an unavoidable business dinner landed on his calendar, and Oliver refused to be left behind. Against his instincts, Daniel allowed it, provided Lily was near. The room buzzed with polite conversation, tuxedos and gowns gleaming under chandeliers. Oliver sat quietly at the table, toy car in his lap, Lily beside him, guiding him gently through the evening. When the main course arrived, a waiter leaned too close, startling Oliver. His hand trembled. His car clattered to the floor. Lily picked it up calmly, returning it to him. "It's okay, Ollie," she whispered. "Safe?" Something passed over his face, fragile and uncertain. Then, in a voice no louder than a whisper, he said, "Thank you." The table fell silent, forks paused. Guests exchanged stunned glances. Daniel's chest tightened as if his heart had been struck by lightning. He turned slowly toward Lily, his mind spinning. Oliver had spoken, again, and this time in front of witnesses. His words were directed to her, not to him, not to anyone else. To her. The staff smiled, faintly, charmed. The investors chuckled at how adorable it was. But Daniel couldn't hear them. His entire world narrowed to that single phrase. Two small words his son had never said since tragedy stole his voice. "Thank you." Directed at Lily Moreno, the waitress who had somehow crossed the chasm between silence and sound. Daniel excused himself early, claiming exhaustion, but the truth followed him long into the night. In the quiet of his study, Daniel poured a drink he didn't touch. He sat at his desk staring at the glowing city skyline, the sounds of Oliver's whispered words replaying in his mind. "Thank you." 2 syllables, yet they broke something open in him. His wealth, his empire, his relentless drive, none of it had achieved what this one woman had drawn out, with nothing more than compassion and patience. The next morning, he found Lily in the garden, crouched beside Oliver as they searched for worms in the soil. Oliver was laughing again, laughter spilling into the air as though it had been waiting to return all along. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching. Something stirred in him he couldn't name. Admiration, yes, but something else, too. A dangerous warmth curling around the edges of his guarded heart. He tried to ignore it. He told himself she was an employee, that was all. But Lily made it impossible. She moved through his world as though it belonged not to marble and glass, but to the boy at its center. She never looked at Daniel's wealth with awe, never acted as though the mansion or the cars meant anything. Instead, she praised Oliver's courage when he whispered a new word. She celebrated his victories no matter how small. One evening, after Oliver had gone to bed, Daniel confronted her. "You realize you've done more in 2 weeks than every specialist I've hired in 2 years. Lily straightened from folding a blanket on the couch. "Maybe that's the problem," she said gently. "Sometimes it's not about specialists, sometimes it's about someone who just sees him, not as a patient, not as a project, just as Oliver." Her words cut deeper than she could have known. He bristled, defensive. "Are you saying I don't see my own son?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I think you love him more than anything, but love without presence, sometimes it feels like absent." Daniel's jaw clenched. No one spoke to him this way. No investors, not colleagues, not even family. But instead of anger, something else bloomed, the recognition that she was right. The silence stretched. For a moment, he wanted to close the distance, to tell her what he hadn't told anyone, that he carried guilt like a stone since his wife's death, that he had drowned himself in work because it was easier than facing the silence at home. But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he nodded stiffly and left the room, his heart pounding with emotions he refused to name. Days turned into weeks. Oliver's voice grew stronger, as though the nightmare of words, whispered sentences, laughter that came easier. At night, Daniel found himself replaying those moments, watching them in his mind until sleep finally claimed him. But admiration was a dangerous thing. It shifted into something deeper every time he watched Lily brush a strand of hair from Oliver's forehead, or when she coaxed him into saying, "Good night." Daniel told himself to resist, to stay in control, to keep the line between employer and employee sharp. And yet, he knew the truth was already spilling over. The storm broke on a Tuesday evening. The day had been calm, even joyful. Lily had spent the afternoon teaching Oliver to make paper lanterns out of colored sheets she found tucked in an old drawer. They hung the lanterns across his bedroom window, and for the first time, Oliver had clapped with delight at the flickering shadows they cast across the wall. His laughter strove ring her ears when she stepped into the library that evening, searching for a notebook she had left behind. She hadn't expected Daniel to be there. He sat in the corner, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him, eyes fixed on a framed photograph. Lily froze, her instinct telling her to retreat quietly, but the photograph caught her attention. It was a family picture, Daniel, his late wife, and a much younger Oliver perched between them, cheeks flushed with joy. Lily's heart tightened. She had seen glimpses of grief in Daniel before, but never this openly. His shoulders slumped, his expression raw, stripped of the composure he carried like armor. "But you should know," he said suddenly, his voice low, not looking up from the photograph. Oliver didn't stop speaking because of shyness. He saw her die. Lily's breath caught. Daniel set the photo down gently, his jaw tightening. The car accident. It was supposed to be a simple drive home. A drunk driver ran the light. He was in the back seat, strapped in, and he saw it all. He saw her take her last breath. Since then, he hasn't spoken more than a handful of words. Not to me, not to anyone. Lily's hand pressed against her chest, as though to steady the ache that spread through her. She pictured the small boy she had come to care for so deeply, carrying that memory inside him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Daniel's eyes finally lifted to hers, piercing and haunted. "Sorry doesn't fix it. Doctors, specialists, therapists, they all tried. They couldn't bring him back. His voice hardened, and yet you, a waitress with no training, managed to get him to laugh, to speak. How? She flinched at the edge in his tone, but she didn't look away. Because I don't see him as broken. Silence stretched between them. Lily stepped closer, her voice steady though her hands trembled. I grew up with a brother who couldn't speak either. Not because of trauma, but because he was born deaf. Everyone treated him like a burden. Teachers, neighbors, even family friends. But I never did. I fought for him to be seen as more than his silence. And he taught me patience, compassion. I think Oliver feels that. Daniel leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. So now, you're an expert. The sting of his words cut deeper than she expected. No, she said firmly. But I know what it's like to be overlooked, and I won't let Oliver live his life feeling that way. For a moment, the air was heavy with unspoken emotions. Daniel's eyes glimmered, not with softness, but with resistance. You're overstepping. Lily drew in a slow breath, her pulse racing. Maybe I am, but someone has to. She left before her tears could betray her. That night, Lily lay awake in her room, replaying the exchange again and again. Her chest ached not only from the sharpness of Daniel's words, but from the grief she had seen in his eyes. He was a man who carried his pain like a fortress, unwilling to let anyone breach its walls. But inside, she sensed he was just as broken as Oliver, maybe even more. The next morning she avoided him, focusing on Oliver instead. Together they baked cookies, flour dusting Oliver's nose until he giggled uncontrollably. Lily brushed the white powder away with a grin. See? You're a little snowman now. Daniel lingered at the doorway, unseen at first. He watched as Oliver leaned against Lily, his small hands patting the dough, his eyes shining with trust. Daniel felt the knot in his chest tighten. The boy who had once hidden in silence was opening up, not because of him, not because of wealth or experts, but because of her. The sight unsettled him. It was easier to be angry at her for overstepping than to admit she had given his son something he hadn't been able to. Hope. At dinner that evening, Oliver surprised them all. The meal was quiet, the clink of silverware the only sound, until Lily gently nudged Oliver's plate closer. Do you want more? She asked softly. Oliver hesitated, his lips parting. Then, with effort, he whispered, yes. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. The staff froze. Lily's eyes softened, hiding the swell of pride threatening to escape. Oliver repeated, firmer this time, his gaze locked on Lily. It was a small word, but for Daniel, it was an earthquake. After dinner, when Lily tucked Oliver into bed with his toy car, Daniel lingered outside the doorway. He listened to Oliver's soft laugh, the kind he hadn't heard in years, and something inside him broke. He realized Lily had been right. She was stepping into a void he had left behind. And for the first time in years, Daniel questioned if his wealth had blinded him to the simplest truth. Love, not money, was what healed. The following day, Daniel tried to apologize. He found Lily in the garden, trimming the wild roses that had long been left untended. She looked up, wary, when his shadow stretched across the path. I was harsh last night, he admitted stiffly, his pride bristling at every word. I shouldn't have said you were overstepping. Lily studied him for a long moment, then returned her gaze to the roses. You were grieving, I understand. Her gentleness disarmed him more than anger would have. He cleared his throat. You've done something for Oliver no one else has. I don't know how to thank you. Lily's lips curved into a small smile, though her eyes stayed sad. You don't need to thank me, just be there for him. That's all he really wants. Her words struck him harder than any boardroom argument ever had. That evening, Daniel tried. He sat beside Oliver as the boy painted, though he felt clumsy holding a brush. Oliver giggled when Daniel's attempt at a sun looked more like a misshapen pancake. Lily laughed softly too, and for a moment, warmth filled the room that no chandelier or luxury could provide. But the peace didn't last. At a business meeting later that week, Daniel overheard whispers. The Hawthorne heir being raised by a waitress? The laughter stung more than he cared to admit. Pride flared, and when he returned home, his words came out sharper than intended. "You need to understand boundaries, Lily," he snapped as she guided Oliver through bedtime. "This is still my house, my son." Her face paled, but her chin lifted. "And what about his happiness? Does that belong to you, too?" The confrontation echoed through the halls long after Oliver fell asleep. Daniel stormed into his study, but her words clawed at him. He poured himself a drink he couldn't swallow, his hands trembling. For years, he had believed control was the only way to survive loss. But control hadn't brought back his wife. It hadn't helped his son. It hadn't healed anything. Later that night, unable to sleep, he wandered past Oliver's room. Peeking inside, he found Lily sitting on the floor beside the bed, softly humming while Oliver clutched her hand, his breathing steady with peace. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, the sight breaking him. He realized then that Lily hadn't stolen his place. She had filled the emptiness he had left. And, for the first time, Daniel Hawthorne admitted the truth he had been too proud to face. Without Lily, his son would still be lost. The storm began not in the skies, but in the headlines. Daniel woke one morning to the shrill buzz of his phone, his assistant's panicked voice already spilling through the receiver before he could greet her. "You need to see the news." Bleary-eyed, he pulled up the screen. Bold black letters screamed at him. "Millionaire CEO hires waitress as son's caretaker. Gold digger or guardian angel?" His throat tightened as he scrolled. Paparazzi photos had surfaced, Lily holding Oliver's hand outside the mansion gates, Lily helping Oliver paint in the garden, Lily carrying grocery bags alongside him at a charity market. The pictures, innocent in truth, had been twisted into something. Captions dripped with malice. From diner girl to millionaire's mansion, is she after the fortune or the father? Daniel's chest burned, not with anger at her, but with fury at the vultures who made a spectacle of something so tender, so fragile. Yet beneath the fury lay fear. The media storm was relentless, and his empire, his board, his investors, his reputation thrived on polished perfection. This was a crack they would not ignore. By the time he arrived at the office, the boardroom was already buzzing. Men in suits and women in tailored dresses glanced at him with carefully neutral expressions. His oldest board member, Grant Reynolds, cleared his throat. "Daniel, we need to discuss the situation." Daniel remained standing, jaw set. "If this is about Oliver's caretaker, it's about perception," Grant cut in. "You're the face of Hawthorne Industries. The press is portraying this woman as a manipulative outsider who has insinuated herself into your family. Investors are uneasy. They want stability, not scandal." Another member, icy-eyed, folded her hands. "Children need professionals. Therapists, doctors, trained caretakers, not waitresses." The word was said like a curse. Daniel's fists clenched under the table. He wanted to shout that Lily had done what their polished experts never could. That Oliver had spoken, had laughed, had begun to heal under her care, but he swallowed the words. The room smelled of power and control, not compassion. If he pushed too hard, if he revealed too much, he risked more than ridicule. "We recommend ending her employment," Grant finished calmly. "For Oliver's sake, and for yours." Daniel said nothing. His silence was mistaken for agreement. At the mansion, the storm had already reached Lily. She stood in the kitchen, trembling, as staff members whispered behind her back. A tabloid lay open on the counter, her photograph splashed across the front page. She looked at her own face, caught mid-love with Oliver, twisted into the narrative of a schemer clawing her way into wealth. Her chest ached. Oliver tugged at her sleeve, holding up his toy car as if to distract her. She forced a smile, crouching down to him. "It's okay, sweetheart." But her voice cracked, and Oliver, sensing her distress, pressed the toy into her hand. For a moment, she almost broke. That evening, she found Daniel in his study. "Need to go," she said simply. His head snapped up. "What?" "All of this." She gestured vaguely to the air, the mansion, the shadow of headlines that seemed to seep into the very walls. "It's hurting Oliver. He doesn't need whispers about me, following him wherever he goes. He needs stability. He needs peace." "You think leaving will give him peace?" Daniel's voice was sharper than intended, but desperation edged every syllable. Her eyes glistened, though she held herself steady. "You know what the world thinks of me now. You know what your board thinks. And maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here." "You belong with him," Daniel insisted, his voice breaking before he could stop it. "You've done more for him in months than anyone else has in years." She shook her head. "And now I'm the scandal that threatens everything you've built. I won't be the reason he loses. More." For the first time since he met her, she looked at him not with compassion or patience, but with finality. "Goodbye, Daniel." Oliver didn't understand. The next morning, he waited by the stairs, clutching his toy car, eyes darting to the door every time it opened. But Lily never came. By evening, his voice, newly rediscovered, was gone again. He sat in silence at dinner, refusing to eat, his shoulders hunched. Emma, the housekeeper who had been with the family for years, tried coaxing him with dessert. He didn't flinch. Daniel sat across the table, hollow. He had faced hostile takeovers, brutal negotiations, the collapse of markets, and never once had he felt so utterly powerless. His son's eyes, once lit with laughter, were vacant again. Later that night, Daniel stood at the doorway to Oliver's room. His son sat curled on the bed, clutching the toy car Lily had left behind, lips pressed tight, refusing even the comfort of his father's presence. Daniel's heart broke in silence. Days turned into a week, and the mansion grew colder with each passing hour. The staff avoided eye contact, the tabloids churned, and Daniel moved like a ghost through his own empire. He canceled meetings, unable to focus, as reports blurred before his eyes. Every time he closed them, he saw Oliver's blank stare. One night, after another silent dinner, Daniel found himself in Oliver's room again. His son sat on the floor, toy cars lined up neatly in rows, but his expression was vacant. A voice saying, "Oliver," Daniel whispered, sinking to his knees. "Talk to me, please." No response, only silence that screamed louder than any words. Daniel pressed a trembling hand to his face. He had once believed control could fix anything, that with enough power, enough resources, enough precision, he could bend the world into order. But here, with his son retreating into silence again, he realized the truth. He had failed. And he had failed because he had let fear of gossip, fear of losing his empire, matter more than the one thing that truly mattered: Oliver's happiness. Meanwhile, Lily sat in a small apartment across town, her brother's hand resting on hers as she stared at the flickering television screen. Headlines flashed with her face again, but she no longer looked. She couldn't bear it. Her heart ached for Oliver. She had left for his sake, but every fiber of her being screamed that she had abandoned him when he needed her most. At night, she lay awake, listening to the city hum, wishing for the sound of his laughter again. She didn't know that Daniel sat awake too, the same ache tearing at him, both of them lost in their own regrets. The breaking point came one evening when Oliver's teacher called. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said gently, "Oliver has stopped responding in class. He won't look at the other children, won't engage with activities. He sits alone, silent. We're worried." Daniel's chest caved in. That night, he drove aimlessly through the city, headlights cutting through the fog. His hands gripped the wheel, but his mind was elsewhere. On Lily's steady patience, her gentle voice, the way she had coaxed his son back into the world one small step at a time. And on the way, he had let her walk out, without fighting for her, without fighting for them. He pulled over, slamming his fists against the steering wheel. For the first time in years, tears blurred his vision. Not for his empire, not for his reputation, for his son, for the boy who deserved laughter, not loneliness, for the woman who had given them both a glimpse of healing, only to be cast aside. Daniel whispered into the empty car, "I was wrong." The next morning, Oliver sat at breakfast staring at his untouched cereal. Daniel reached across the table, his voice quiet but certain. "I'll fix this," he promised, I'll bring her back." For the first time in days, Oliver's eyes flickered with something, hope. Fragile but real. Daniel knew then there was no choice left. He could lose his empire, he could lose his reputation, but he could not lose her. And he could not lose his son's smile again. It began with a shaky phone screen, a video no one expected to matter. A teenage girl scrolling through her camera roll late at night decided to upload a clip she had taken weeks earlier at the park. She had been sitting with her friends when she noticed a waitress in simple clothes sitting cross-legged on the grass with a little boy. Out of curiosity, she had pressed record. At the time, she thought nothing of it. But now, as the internet hummed with gossip about the millionaire and the gold digger nanny, the girl uploaded it with a single caption: "The truth is different when you see it yourself." The video opened with Lily kneeling in the grass, Oliver sitting in front of her clutching his toy car. She smiled gently, her voice soft but firm. "You can do it, sweetheart. Just one word. Try again." Oliver shook his head, his lips trembling. He looked down at his toy. Lily leaned closer, her hand steady on the grass. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Just say what's in your heart. What do you call the man who loves you, who's waiting for you to come back to him?" Oliver's little chest rose and fell. Then, with a shaky, broken sound, he whispered, "Dad." The camera wobbled, the girl behind it gasping. But in the frame, Lily's eyes shone with tears as she clapped softly, pulling Oliver into her arms. "That's it. That's your voice, Oliver. That's your word." The boy smiled, small, fleeting, but real. The video ended there, but it was enough. Within hours, the clip spread across platforms. Headlines blazed, "The waitress who gave a millionaire's son his voice. Not a gold digger, but a guardian angel." #trended. Voice. The public, so quick to condemn, now turned their fury against those who had mocked her. Comment sections filled with messages: "This woman didn't chase wealth, she gave the child his father back. Money can't buy what she gave. Respect her." Across the city, strangers whispered her name, her story, but in one silent mansion, the weight of it hit harder than anywhere else. The girl sat at his desk, his head in his hands. The video played again on his tablet, over and over, as if replaying it could undo the mistakes that followed. "Dad." That fragile word cracked through the silence of his office like a prayer. He had never heard it before, never from Oliver's lips. It was meant for him, but it had been coaxed out not by his wealth, not by his therapists or specialists, not by himself. It had been Lily, sitting barefoot in the grass, who had opened the door to his son's voice. Tears stung his eyes, falling freely before he could stop them. Daniel Hawthorne, the man who had once sworn never to cry again after losing his wife, now sat broken, undone by a video less than a minute long. He pressed his palms to his face, his chest shaking with sobs he had buried for years. For the first time, he didn't cry for loss, but for realization. He had let go of the very miracle his son needed. He had driven away the one person who had given them both hope. "She was never a liability," he whispered to himself. His voice cracked in the empty office. "She was the miracle?" That afternoon, the press gathered outside the gates of Hawthorne Industries, their cameras flashing like a storm. The city demanded a response. Investors clamored for clarity. The public wanted truth. Daniel walked out alone. No lawyers, no security, detail crafting his words. Just him, standing at the podium, the viral clip playing on screens behind the crowd. Microphones thrust toward him, questions flying. "Mr. Hawthorne, do you confirm this video? Is the woman in question employed by you? Are you romantically involved?" Daniel raised a hand, and silence fell. He took a deep breath, the air cold in his lungs, and began. "Yes, the video is real. The woman in it is Lily Moreno. She is not a gold digger. She is not a scandal. She is the reason my son spoke for the first time since his mother died." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's voice wavered, but he pressed on. "You can say what you want about me, tear down my name, question my choices, but leave her out of it. She gave Oliver something no amount of money could buy. She gave him his voice. She gave him hope. And she reminded me that love, real love, cannot be bought, only given." The reporters exchanged glances, stunned. For years, Daniel Hawthorne had been the cold, untouchable titan of industry. Now, here he was, raw and trembling before the world, speaking of love instead of profit. "Will not let her name be dragged through the mud anymore," he finished. "If you want to write a headline, write this: 'Thank you, Lily. You gave me back my son.'" The microphones dropped in silence before the applause began, slow at first, then swelling. For once, the story was not about scandal, it was about grace. In a small apartment across town, Lily sat frozen, her brother leaning over her shoulder as the press conference streamed live on television. She had expected denial, dismissal, perhaps even legal threats. But instead, she heard the words she had thought Daniel would never say. Her hands trembled, tears falling unchecked as she pressed them to her mouth. He wasn't protecting his empire anymore, he was protecting her. For the first time since she left, she let herself hope. The world shifted in the days that followed. Where once the tabloids had smeared her, now they celebrated her. Articles painted her as the angel waitress who had saved the Hawthorne heir. Invitations to interviews flooded her inbox, though she ignored them all. She gritted them all. She wanted peace, but she couldn't ignore Oliver. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice whispering, "Dad." Every time she walked past a park, she imagined him sitting in the grass, waiting for her patience, her laughter. She had left to protect him, but now, the entire world knew the truth, that she was the reason he had spoken again. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Daniel's life had changed as well. For once, the board couldn't silence him. Public opinion was on his side, and investors who had doubted Lily now found themselves drowned out by the tidal wave of sympathy. Hawthorne Industries' stock rose, not because of a business deal, but because of a story. Still, for all the noise outside, the house inside remained painfully quiet. Oliver wandered the halls, toy car in hand, but his laughter was gone again. Every night he looked at his father with pleading eyes. Every night Daniel knelt beside him and whispered, "I'll bring her back, I promise." But promises felt like dust without action. One evening, as snow fell softly against the tall windows, Daniel sat in his study staring at the video once more. He had memorized every frame, every sound, but still he replayed it, as though repetition might bring her back. A knock sounded at the door. Emma, the loyal housekeeper, stepped inside with a quiet expression. "Sir," she said gently, "if you want Oliver to heal, you know what you must do." Daniel met her gaze, raw and unguarded. "What if she doesn't forgive me?" Emma smiled faintly. "You won't know until you try." The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He called no drivers, no assistants. He slipped out of the mansion unnoticed, driving himself to the neighborhood where Lily now lived. The streets were narrow, lined with old brick buildings, children playing on cracked sidewalks. It was a world far from the empire he ruled, yet it felt more real than the glass towers he had built. He parked, his heart hammering. The weight of years of pride pressed down on him, but he forced himself forward, up the worn staircase to her apartment. He knocked. The door opened slowly. Lily stood there, startled, her brother peeking from behind her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel, his voice rough, said simply, "I saw the video, and I saw my son. You gave him what I couldn't. And I—" His voice broke. He steadied himself. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you." Her eyes glistened, but her face remained guarded. "Daniel, I don't want to make this about my pride, or my reputation, or even forgiveness," he said, his words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "I just want you to know, thank you. For Oliver, for giving him back his voice, for giving me back my son." Silence filled the hallway, heavy and trembling. Then Oliver's small voice echoed from behind Daniel, timid but clear. Her breath caught. She knelt, tears spilling, as Oliver stepped into her arms. His toy car clattered to the floor as he clung to her, whispering her name again. Daniel watched, his chest aching with both pain and relief. He had been wrong to let her go, wrong to choose silence over truth. Now, seeing them together, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never let it happen again. Days later, Daniel returned to the podium, not for investors, not for scandal, but for truth. The press had gathered again, hungry for words. This time, he did not hesitate. Leah Moreno is not just the woman who gave my son his voice, he began. She is the voice we should all listen to. She reminded me that no wealth, no empire, no name is worth anything if it cannot protect the ones we love. She is not my employee, she is my family's miracle. The room erupted with applause. Cameras flashed. Headlines the next morning would declare, "Millionaire CEO admits love is priceless." But none of that mattered. What mattered was that, in the back of the hole, Lily stood silently, Oliver clutching her hand. For the first time in years, Daniel smiled. Not as a millionaire, not as a CEO, but as a man who finally understood what it meant to be whole. The storm rolled in just as Daniel left the mansion. Sheets of rain lashed against the windshield. The city blurred into streaks of gray and neon. His knuckles tightened around the steering wheel as if holding on for dear life. For years, he had driven himself to the work, into endless hours of meetings and contracts, hiding from emotions. Tonight, he drove toward something he couldn't calculate or predict, toward the one woman who had turned his world upside down. When he pulled up to the modest brick building where Lily lived, water cascaded down the gutters, pooling in the cracked pavement. The headlights illuminated the worn staircase leading up to her apartment. For a moment, Daniel sat motionless, his breath fogging the window. What if she didn't open the door? What if she slammed it in his... But then he remembered Oliver's voice, soft, trembling, but clear in the viral video. Dad. And then another word that had echoed since. Lily. His son had called for her, not just as a caretaker, but as something more. Daniel couldn't turn back now. He stepped into the rain without an umbrella, the water soaking through his expensive suit in seconds. By the time he climbed the stairs, he was dripping, his hair plastered to his forehead. He knocked once, then twice, desperation in every strike. The door creaked open, and there she was. Lily stood framed in the dim light, her hair loose around her shoulders, eyes wide with surprise. Behind her, Oliver clutched his toy car, his gaze flicking between them with cautious hope. "Daniel," she whispered, almost disbelieving. Rain dripped from his chin as he forced himself to speak. "I had to come. I couldn't..." His voice cracked. He steadied it. "I couldn't let another day pass without telling you the truth." She frowned, her guard already rising. "If this is about Oliver..." "It's not just about Oliver," his tone urgent. "It's not just about Oliver. It's about me. About us." Her breath hitched, but she shook her head. "Daniel, don't. You're tired. You're guilty. But when the storm ends, you'll go back to your world, and I'll still be here. I can't let Oliver be caught in that cycle again." Daniel stepped closer, rain dripping onto the threshold. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from raw honesty. "You think this is guilt?" "Lily, guilt didn't drive me here tonight. Love did." The word hung in the air, heavy, almost unbelievable. Her eyes widened, her lips parting. "Love?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't want you here just for Oliver. I want you here because you've healed me, too. You looked past the millions, past the walls, past the empty mansion, and you saw me. No one has ever done that since my wife." Lily blinked back tears, shaking her head. "Daniel, don't say things you don't mean." But he only stepped further, his soaked shoes squeaking against the wooden floor. "I mean every word. I don't want to own you. I don't want to buy you. I want to walk beside you. Not above, not below." There was still a child beneath the protective sheets. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, torn between longing and fear. "You don't understand. Your world, it swallows people like me whole. I've seen it already. The whispers, the tabloids, the looks from your staff. They'll never accept me." Daniel's voice softened, breaking through the storm. "Then let them choke on their whispers. Let them write their headlines. Let them walk away. I don't care. I'd rather lose all of them than lose you again." A sob escaped her lips. She turned her face, wiping furiously at her cheeks. "You make it sound so easy." "It isn't," he admitted, stepping even closer until they were only inches apart. "But it's worth it." Behind them, Oliver shifted. His little voice, fragile, uncertain, broke the silence. "Mommy." The word fell from his lips with a weight greater than thunder. Lily gasped, turning toward him. Her tears spilled freely as she knelt, pulling Oliver into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing her face into his hair. Daniel froze, his heart breaking and mending all at once. He hadn't told Oliver to say it. No one had. It had come from the boy's heart, uncoached, unforced. Lily looked up, her eyes shimmering with disbelief and love. "Did you hear that?" Daniel nodded, his own tears mingling with rain. "I did." The boy clung to Lily, whispering again, "Mommy?" Daniel lowered himself to his knees beside them, his hand trembling as he brushed Oliver's curls back. His voice cracked as he whispered, "He's right. You've been more of a mother to him than anyone could ever ask for, and you've been more than I deserve." For a long moment, the three of them remained huddled together in the doorway, the storm raging outside, their hearts laid bare inside. Finally, Daniel looked at her again. "Please, Lily, don't walk away. Not this time. Not when we finally know what we mean to each other." Her lips trembled as she stared at him, her defenses crumbling, and slowly, as if surrendering to something bigger than fear, she whispered, "Yes." Daniel's breath left him in a rush, his arms wrapping around both of them, rain-soaked suit and trembling hands and all. Lily wept into his shoulder, Oliver tucked safely between them, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt whole. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, a new foundation was laid, one built not on wealth or power, but on truth, love, and a boy's single word that had changed everything. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The city gleamed under a pale sunrise, every surface glistening with fresh clarity. For Daniel, the storm had washed away more than water. It had cleansed the lies, the fear, the silence that had bound him for years. He woke on Lily's worn couch, Oliver curled against him, clutching his toy car. Across the room, Lily stirred, her hair messy from sleep, her brother quietly making breakfast in the kitchenette. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't polished, but it felt more like home than the grand estate ever had. As he sat up, Oliver blinked awake, rubbing his eyes. The boy whispered one word, soft but certain, "Mommy." Lily turned, her breath catching again. Her tears shimmered, but this time she smiled through them. "Yes, baby, Mommy's here." Daniel's chest swelled with emotion. He reached for Oliver, lifting him gently into his lap. "And Daddy's here too. Always." Lily's gaze met his, uncertainty still flickering in her eyes. "Daniel, last night it was everything. But words are easy in the rain. What happens when the world comes knocking again?" He rose, crossing the room until he stood before her, Oliver clinging to his shoulder. His voice was steady, resolute. "Then we answer together, not with money, not with pride, but with truth. If the world wants to look at us, let them see a family. Let them see love." Her lips parted, her defenses trembling. "And if they don't accept us?" His reply was immediate. "Then we'll accept ourselves. That's all that matters." For a long, breathless moment, Lily searched his eyes, as though testing every word. What she found there made her finally exhale, her shoulders relaxing. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, but enough. Daniel stepped closer, lowering Oliver into her arms. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "I don't want to save you, Lily. I want to be saved by you, by the way you love, by the way you live, by the way you've given my son hope again." Her tears spilled freely as she whispered, "Daniel?" But before she could finish, Oliver's small hand pressed against their joined faces. The boy smiled faintly, whispering, "Family." The word broke them both. Daniel pulled Lily into his arms, kissing her forehead, then finally her lips. She melted against him, years of fear dissolving into a single truth. They belonged, not in separate worlds, but in one. Oliver giggled softly, caught between them, and for the first time in so long, his laughter filled the room. It was messy, it was imperfect, but it was real, and for Daniel Hawthorne, a man who had once believed love was weakness, it was the strongest he had ever felt. A year had passed, but for Daniel Hawthorne, it felt like a lifetime had shifted beneath his feet. Once, his mansion had been silent, echoing only with footsteps of staff and the quiet hum of wealth. Now it was alive, filled with laughter, scattered toys, the aroma of Lily's home cooking, and Oliver's voice weaving through it all like sunlight through glass. He still remembered the first time he had heard his son say a full sentence without hesitation. They had been sitting in the garden on a spring morning, flowers blooming and birdsong echoing. Oliver, holding Lily's hand, had looked up and whispered, "I love you, Mommy." Daniel had nearly fallen to his knees right there, his chest aching with the sheer beauty of it, and when Oliver had turned to him, shy but brave, adding softly, "I love you too, Daddy," Daniel had known he would never need anything else in life. But Lily, his Lily, had pushed them to dream bigger. "You know," she had said one evening, her head resting on his chest, Oliver asleep between them, "there are so many children like Oliver. Children with voices trapped inside. What if we gave them a place to find their words?" That was how the Hawthorne Foundation for Children with Communication Challenges had been born. Daniel had poured his wealth into it without hesitation. No boardroom debates, no profit margins, just conviction. And Lily, with her quiet strength and vision, had guided its mission, funding speech therapy programs, hiring teachers, creating community centers where families could come together without judgment. Now, on a crisp autumn afternoon, the foundation was hosting its very first gala event. The ballroom was nothing like Daniel's old corporate gatherings. Instead of polished suits and stiff speeches, the room buzzed with children's chatter, parents' tears, and teachers' laughter. Balloons floated above the tables, and instead of a string quartet, a group of children played simple instruments, their notes imperfect but filled with joy. Daniel stood at the back for a moment, watching it all unfold. His empire of glass and steel had never moved him the way this did. Here, in this room, he saw futures being rewritten. And at the center of it all stood Lily, her hair glowing in the golden light, greeting families like she had known them her whole life. Beside her was Oliver. No longer the timid, silent boy who once hid behind toy cars and silence. Oliver now stood proudly in a small navy suit, his curls neatly combed. He clutched a folded piece of paper in his hands, his lips moving as he whispered the words to himself, over and over. Tonight was his moment. Daniel's throat tightened just watching him. When the time came, the crowd quieted, and Lily guided Oliver to the small stage. Daniel's heart pounded harder than in any boardroom he'd ever faced. Oliver unfolded the paper with trembling hands, glanced at Lily for reassurance, then at Daniel. His father nodded, his eyes already glistening. And then Oliver began to speak. His voice was soft but steady, carrying through the microphone, filling the room. "Hello, my name is Oliver Hawthorne." The audience leaned in, many parents holding their breath, tears already welling. "I used to be very quiet," Oliver continued, his small hands gripping the podium. "I didn't have words. I was scared to talk, but someone helped me." He turned toward Lily, his little face breaking into a smile that melted every heart in the room. "Miss Lily." She listened when no one else did. She waited for me. She showed me that words aren't scary. They can be friends. Lily pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. Oliver's voice grew stronger. "Now, I can say things. I can tell my dad I love him. I can tell my mommy I miss her in heaven. And I can say thank you. Thank you, Miss Lily, for giving me word." By the time he finished, the room was filled with the sound of muffled sobs and thunderous applause. Parents clapped through tears, children cheered, and staff wiped their eyes with tissues. Lily scooped Oliver into her arms as the audience rose to their feet, giving him a standing ovation. Daniel could no longer hold himself back. He walked to the stage, his chest heavy, his eyes wet. He pulled Oliver into his arms, holding him close, whispering into his curls, "You were always my voice, even when you couldn't speak. I'm so proud of you, son." Then he turned to Lily, his voice breaking as he kissed her hand. "This is the legacy I want, not wealth, not empire, but voices set free, and it started with yours." Lily looked at him, her tears shining, and whispered, "No, Daniel, it started with Oliver's." The applause went on, but for Daniel, the world had narrowed to just the three of them: his son, his wife, his family. The empire of silence he had once built had fallen, replaced by a home filled with words, laughter, and love. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Hawthorne felt truly rich. The gala continued into the night, but Daniel carried that moment with him like a treasure. Parents approached him to thank him, children tugged on his sleeve to tell him about their progress, and teachers praised the foundation's vision. But all Daniel could think of was Oliver's trembling voice, the way it had carried strength beyond its size. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the decorations began to sag, Daniel found himself outside on the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly before him. Lily joined him, her arms wrapped in a shawl, her eyes soft with exhaustion and joy. "You did it," she said quietly. He shook his head, turning to her. "No, we did it, and Oliver, he did more than either of us ever could." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "He's proof that, sometimes, the smallest voices can shake the world." Daniel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "And you, Lily, you're the reason we ever heard his." For a while, they stood in silence, letting the night air wash over them. The city below buzzed with life, but here they had peace. Then the balcony door opened, and Oliver stepped out, clutching his toy car as always. He looked up at them with sleepy eyes. "Daddy? Mommy? Can we go home now?" Daniel bent down, scooping his son into his arms. "Yes, buddy, let's go home." As they left the building together, cameras flashed in the distance, reporters lingering for a final shot of the family that healed. But Daniel didn't care about the headlines anymore. Let the world write what it wanted. The truth was already written, in Oliver's voice, in Lily's love, in the life they had built together. 1 year ago, Daniel Hawthorne had been a man defined by power, wealth, and silence. Now, he was a husband, a father, and a man defined by something far greater: love that spoke louder than money ever could. At home, when Oliver was tucked into bed, Daniel lingered by the door, watching as Lily kissed their son's forehead. Oliver whispered drowsily, "Thank you, Mommy. Thank you, Daddy." Daniel's throat tightened. He turned off the light, pulling Lily into his arms as they walked down the hall together. "Hear that?" he murmured. "Hear what?" Lily asked softly. He smiled through tears. "Our legacy?" She leaned against him, whispering back, "And it's louder than any fortune." The house filled with silence again, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence after laughter, the quiet hum of peace, the soft breath of family. And Daniel knew, with every fiber of his being, that this was the only kind of wealth worth leaving behind. Life is full of unexpected intersections, moments when two very different worlds collide and create something extraordinary. This story of a wealthy single father, his nonverbal son, and the humble waitress who changes both of their lives is one of those rare tales that reminds us of what truly matters: love, patience, and the courage to see beyond appearances. The father was a millionaire, successful in business but struggling in the most human part of life, parenthood. He adored his son, yet he felt helpless. His child was nonverbal, locked in silence, unable to connect through words. The father tried doctors, specialists, therapies, and programs, but nothing seemed to break through. Behind his wealth and power was a heart heavy with worry, a man who would have given away everything he owned just to hear his son say, "Dad." And then came the waitress. She was not rich, not famous, not formally trained in therapy. She was simply kind. She noticed the boy's struggles not with pity, but with curiosity. Instead of seeing what he lacked, she saw what he had: bright eyes, a curious mind, and a soul eager to connect. Where others rushed past, she slowed down. Where others gave up, she tried again. It was in the small, everyday interactions that her gift began to show. She would bring food to the table, kneel down, and look the boy in the eye. She would speak gently, repeat words slowly, encourage him with smiles instead of pressure. And slowly, something miraculous began to happen. He responded, not perfectly, not immediately, but step by step he began to find his voice. For the father, watching this unfold was nothing short of astonishing. He had invested fortunes into finding the best care for his son, and yet it was a simple waitress who had given him the breakthrough he prayed for. But what he discovered was not just about his son's progress. It was about the power of love expressed through patience. It was about how human connection can sometimes achieve what money and expertise cannot. The deeper meaning of this story is clear. Children do not always need perfection, wealth, or elaborate solutions. What they need most is presence, compassion, and someone who believes in them. The waitress gave the boy a gift far greater than speech. She gave him confidence. She taught him that his voice mattered, that someone was listening, and that he was worthy of being understood. For the father, this was transformative. He saw not only his son change, but himself. He realized that his wealth was not the measure of his worth as a parent. His true role was not to fix his child, but to love him unconditionally and create a safe space where growth could happen. The waitress had reminded him that parenting is not about control, but about connection. To viewers, this story carries profound lessons. First, it shows us that help can come from the most unexpected places. We often believe only experts or professionals hold the answers, but sometimes ordinary people with extraordinary hearts can make the greatest difference. Second, it reminds us of the quiet strength within children. Even when progress seems impossible, a spark of hope, combined with patience, can unlock new possibilities. Third, it teaches us that love is the greatest teacher of all. In the end, it was not techniques or tools that gave the boy his voice. It was kindness, repeated again and again, until he believed he could try. This story also invites us to look inward. How often do we rush past people without truly seeing them? How often do we judge others by their limitations instead of their potential? How often do we underestimate the impact of a kind word, a patient smile, or a moment of genuine attention? The waitress did not see herself as a hero. She was simply doing what felt natural. Yet her natural compassion changed 2 lives forever. That is the power we all carry within us. For parents watching, this story is a reminder that you are not alone in your struggles. Parenting is filled with moments of doubt, fear, and exhaustion, but it is also filled with miracles, often small, quiet ones that bloom when you least expect them. Your child may not follow the path you imagined, but that doesn't mean their journey is any less meaningful. In fact, the challenges can reveal strengths you never knew existed, both in them and in you. For anyone feeling unseen or undervalued, this story is also for you. The waitress was not a doctor, not wealthy, not celebrated, but her small acts of kindness carried more weight than all the expensive efforts that had come before. Never underestimate the value of your compassion. You may never know whose life you are touching just by showing up with patience and love. In the end, this is not just a story about a millionaire or his son. It is a story about all of us. About how life has a way of surprising us, teaching us, and reminding us that the greatest treasures are not found in what we own, but in how we love. The father gained something money could never buy: hope restored, connection renewed, and the realization that his son's voice, fragile, imperfect but real, was the most. So as you finish this video, take this blessing with you. May you always remember that no act of kindness is ever wasted. May you find strength in patience, hope in small steps, and joy in unexpected places. May you look at the people around you not for what they lack, but for what they carry within. And may you never forget that sometimes the simplest gestures can change the course of an entire life. Because in the end, that is the true meaning of this story. Love listens, love believes, and love never gives up. And when we live by that truth, we discover that the greatest miracles are not out of reach. They are already here, waiting in the people who dare to care. Life often teaches us through contrast. Sometimes it is wealth and privilege standing face to face with simplicity and humility. Other times it is silence meeting a voice, fear meeting compassion, or despair meeting hope. In this story of a millionaire single father, his nonverbal son, and the waitress who steps into their lives, the greatest lesson is not about money, success, or status. It is about how love, patience, and human connection can change everything. The father, despite his wealth, lived with a quiet pain. His son could not speak. He had poured fortunes into therapies, hired specialists, and searched for the best solutions. Yet what he longed for most, to hear his child say a single word, seemed impossibly far away. Wealth could buy him comfort, but it could not buy his. Enter the waitress. She was ordinary in the eyes of the world, someone serving food at a restaurant, unnoticed by most. Yet she carried something extraordinary: empathy, patience, and the belief that every child deserves to be heard. When she noticed the boy struggling, she did not pity him. Instead, she leaned closer. She smiled when he tried. She waited when others rushed, and through these simple acts of kindness, she gave him something priceless: courage to try, space to grow, and the confidence to believe he could. The transformation astonished the father. What he had been chasing with money and power appeared through the heart of someone who had none of those things. And in that moment, he learned a lesson that would change him forever. Human connection is the greatest medicine, and love is the most powerful teacher.